In recent years, we have seen a significant transformation in how celebrities communicate and share their personal stories. Historically, celebrities relied heavily on traditional media channels, such as radio interviews, talk shows, and magazine profiles, to break news and offer insights into their lives. These platforms, while effective, often came with a layer of mediation. Celebrities had to navigate and manage the expectations, goals, and editorial standards of such media outlets, which often led to a level of self-censorship and protection. With the advent of social media platforms, especially video-first platforms like TikTok and YouTube, there has been a clear shift in this dynamic. Celebrities now have direct access to their audience without the traditional media filter. This change has allowed for a more unfiltered and immediate form of self-expression. While some level of self-censorship still exists, as is expected when maintaining a public image, the control has moved into the hands of the celebrities themselves. Arguably, direct engagement with the audience has democratized the way celebrities share their personal stories and manage their public personas. Today, they can present their narratives, address real issues in real time, and connect with fans on a deeper level. The result is a more authentic and immediate form of communication, but that is not to say that it doesn't come with its own challenges, especially when navigating the pressures of maintaining a public image in an extremely unforgiving digital landscape. From Centennial World, I'm Lauren Meisner, and this is Infinite Scroll, a podcast about internet culture, the creator economy, and how social media is shaping Gen Z. Welcome back to Infinite Scroll, everyone. I am so excited because today I have two of my favorite podcasters ever joining me to discuss how celebrities in the digital age now disseminate their stories and how kind of TikTok, YouTube, all of these social media platforms, and just the changing media landscape in general has shifted how we perceive celebrities, how we interpret their stories, and how they tell us their stories. I have with me today Claire and Ashley from Celebrity Memoir Book Club. I feel like I am going to fangirl. I am such a huge fan of their podcast. I listen every single week. I do not miss an episode. One of my best friends told me probably 18 months ago to start listening to their podcast. She was like, you would love it. And she was absolutely right. So I am so excited. But as always, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. It helps me so much. It helps me grow. I think by the time this is up, we'll be at 5,000 YouTube subscribers. So please keep subscribing. And now we have to get to 10K. And please sign up for our newsletter, also called Infinite Scroll, where on Fridays, we round up the 5 biggest think pieces that you need to know on the internet that week. And also join our Geneva group, which is also called Infinite Scroll, where you can chat with other people who are obsessed with internet culture and drama and tea, and you can chat with me. Okay, so I have a lot of YouTube comments. You guys have just been like pulling through on the comments. So I'll just read one. It's from Sierra Dumphy, 1987. She says, I listen to your podcast every day, but I thought I'd play the video versions in the background while I work to help get those views up. Oh my God, thank you. I love this podcast so much. I've been listening for about a year, and I think you've done so well with the changes and new format. Keep up the good work. No one else covers more niche internet content than you do. Thank you so much. I really appreciate kind of the OG listeners that have been through all of the changes over the last, 6-7 months, sticking by me. So, as I mentioned before, we are going to be talking with Claire and Ashley today about the relevance of celebrity memoirs in a chronically online world and how being chronically online, everyone being chronically online now, has kind of shifted celebrity storytelling. So, for anyone that does not know, Claire Parker and Ashley Hamilton are the hosts of Celebrity Memoir Book Club. They're best friends and stand-up comedians based in Brooklyn, New York, and launched their podcast in 2020 with a goal of discussing celebrity gossip without having to dig through a celebrity's dirty laundry. Celebrity Memoir Book Club has reached number 7 on the US comedy podcast charts, as well as the top 10 in over a dozen countries. Claire and Ashley have sold out live shows across the world from Los Angeles to London, and soon they are heading down under for a live Australian tour, which of course I will be attending. So without further ado, I hope you guys love this episode. I am so excited to speak with my two guests today, Claire Parker and Ashley Hamilton. I am the biggest fan of their podcast, Celebrity Memoir Book Club, and today they'll be helping me explore this week's topic, the evolution of celebrity public image and storytelling in a chronically online world. So welcome, Claire and Ashley.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
I'm so excited to chat with you guys. So, for anyone that is not familiar with the podcast or your story, can you just share kind of the origin story of Celebrity Memoir Book Club? How did the podcast come about? And have you guys always been into pop culture?
So I'll give a quick background of how we met and how the podcast started. Basically, we were both stand-up comics in New York City. We met doing stand-up. Every stand-up comedian has to have a podcast. That's kind of like the new tax. Whether or not anybody listens, it's just part of the package of doing stand-up these days. So we met, I think, in August, and then decided we want to do a podcast. Realized there was no Britney Spears podcast in the market. And we were like, how could that be possible? We're both 90s kids. Like, we grew up with her. And we're like, okay, well, we have to be the people that deliver Britney to the ears of the masses. We started a Britney podcast that December. And sure enough, I think a lot of people also noticed the whole, because I think there was a couple other Britney podcasts that came out like the exact same week. But we started doing that and we were having fun. We weren't particularly research based. We were just like reminiscing and chatting and gabbing. And then when the Free Britney movement started, it started mostly on Twitter and kind of like underground. People started coming to us and being like, well, what do you think? And we didn't think it was actually that fun to joke and talk about somebody who may or may not be being held captive by their own family. So we stopped that podcast and we started a new one called We're in a Fight with Claire and Ashley. And it was supposed to be about female friendship and talk about like the dynamics and the breakups. And it's just like so much more complicated than relationships, but there's so many relationship podcasts and not that many friendship podcasts. So we were like, this is what we want to be talking about. Ashley and I are famous for like bickering in public the way a bad couple might, or siblings. And so we wanted to just kind of like say it's okay to have confrontation with your friends, the way that I think a lot of female friendships, things get buried. And then 10 years later, you hate each other, but you're still bridesmaids in each other's weddings. And so we kind of wanted to unpack that. It did end up being super toxic for us personally to be discussing our own fights every week. So we abandoned that and we wanted to talk about pop culture, but we wanted to do it in a way that did not drive anybody to the Britney Spears conservatorship. I think after the Britney podcast, we were looking for what we call like an ethical way to consume pop culture. And these memoirs started coming out and we just kind of had this like light bulb moment of like, oh, this is how we can talk about celebrities using their own words against them sometimes. And getting the real story and getting to like know the background. So Celebrity Memoir Book Club was born. We wanted to do it starting March 2020, but if you recall, there was a pandemic. And then so it came out September 2020.
I think one of the things that bonded us initially when we first met is that we love pop culture and we love just like really getting into the weeds. But we felt very like, oh, it's dangerous to do that unless you're like looking at a specific source. There's so much information out there that can be so like violent. But the celebrity memoir, man, you can just dive into it and it's a fun time.
No, absolutely. So, how do you guys navigate the celebrity's inherent bias? Since obviously these memoirs are so personal, how do you think the nature of the medium influences your reviews and your analysis?
I think a lot of times, especially as we've read more and more of them, you can kind of tell. I think there are obviously some celebrities we're a lot more familiar with than others when we read their memoir. So sometimes there are things where reading it, I'm just like, well, that's not what happened because I remember it. And I've been following your career for decades, where there are other people where I actually would have no idea if they're lying or not because I'm not that familiar with their work. But you can kind of feel it in the themes and the overarching plot of the book sometimes, where you can say, well, these things don't add up because that's not how human behavior works. And I've read enough about these celebrity memoirs. I've read enough about like the evolution of celebrity to know that there is something massive being left out here because there is simply no way to go from point A to point B. Like, surely there was a fight. You know what I mean? We just read Demi Moore's book, for example. We just reread it because it was, I think, the third book we ever covered. And, there is a period of time where, like, I think that she actually did an incredible job. We both really liked it the second time around. But there are certain, like, massive falling outs where you're like, well, something bigger must have happened here that is not being explicitly expressed in the pages because people just don't cut each other out of their
life. Like at one point, none of her children are speaking to her. And she's like, was I that bad? And it's like, well, I guess yes. I guess we need to like hear from their perspective what it was like. And she kind of will be like, well, I know that I was overly obsessed with Ashton Kutcher. And I know that like I was drinking a lot, but should all three of my children and my ex-husband all have abandoned me? And you're like, okay, well, how bad was the drinking? How bad was the Ashton Kutcher addiction?
Or like Michael Phelps, we just read for this last week's episode. And he is someone who has 2 DUIs, and he'll just sit there and be like, sometimes I wondered if I had some unresolved issues. And it's like,
yeah, if every single time they drank, they happened to get caught, that's not how life works. You don't get a DUI every time you drunkenly drive. You don't get a DUI every time you have a single sip of alcohol.
To have gotten a DUI and then still continued drunk driving.
Yeah.
A lot of people, if they get one DUI, they say, boy, oh boy, better be more careful next time.
Yeah, I think if you're only copying to what you've been caught in the book, then we can kind of assume that you're withholding. But as Ashley said, even in less treacherous things, like things that aren't like illegal or frowned upon, the way that people's personal values come through when they don't even know it, just like what people choose to share about themselves. If you think about somebody's life, like I'm 31, how I would sum up my life would say just as much about me as what I'm saying about those moments, because someone else might look at my life and go, oh, these are the interesting parts, but like, what's interesting to you? What are you like? J-Lo is a good example of someone who has a memoir that I don't know if she knows is out there, but the whole thing is about like finding love and why she's totally okay. And she doesn't even need love and she's so happy alone and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, okay, you doth protest too much. So things come out even when you don't know it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's so interesting about your podcast specifically is obviously it launched kind of like you said in the throes of COVID. And around that time, TikTok launched and just the landscape of celebrity storytelling changed so much. It was like overnight. If we look back a few decades compared to now, there have been so many changes in the way that celebrities curate their public image and tell their stories. Back in the day, some of the most popular platforms were late night talk shows, for example, or magazine interviews, or even tell-all books. However, these days we have headlines like, talk shows are past their prime and things like that. And the way that celebrities interact with their fans has changed so much. How would you characterize the shift away from traditional mediums of celebrity storytelling?
I think that social media in general has done a really interesting job of moving us away from traditional mediums of storytelling. I remember the first major shift being the invention of Instagram stories. Like not even just Instagram. I think that was a major shift, but Instagram stories, I remember there being like a New York Times or some major profile on Busy Phillips and how she had kind of catapulted herself from like side actress to mainstream celebrity because people felt so connected to her because she was like incessantly posting on Instagram stories. And I think that the way it's allowed celebrities to take their narratives into their own hands has been really interesting and overall positive. But now we're seeing this insane shift again via TikTok because first, it was all through like press releases, media tours, like major things that required another person to like filter the publication. And so it was all very contrived. Then all of a sudden we were seeing celebrities being their authentic selves on Instagram and on social media, or like quote unquote authentic. But then they learned to harness like presenting that authenticity. And I feel like a lot of celebrities, started to put forth very like contrived authentic quote unquote authentic versions of themselves on the internet. And now we have this TikTok wave where no one believes anything anyone is doing is authentic. Everyone is so well versed in like PR, not well versed, but like aware of PR strategy and like the puppeteering behind the scenes that now every time anything happens ever, everyone's like, that's an Easter egg, that's a plant, this is a PR move, this is it's very interesting where we're at right now where like no one believes anything.
I think what's happened with social media, as Ashley was saying, on the one hand, we develop these parasocial relationships with what we believe to be the true person. Like back in the talk show profile days, you got one infrequent glimpse into who they were when they were doing press. And, you can get somebody's essence, I think, on a talk show. I think somebody shows up, you can kind of pick up on their energy. You decide if you like them or not. It's being filtered through the interviewer, et cetera. But now we have simultaneously this direct access to the celebrity. And at the same time, I think because of the rise of social media, the idea of the celebrity as brand got more powerful than ever. And now it was no longer how much money they were making in a movie and how much money they could make in one Lancome ad. Now it was every single aspect of your life can be commodified. And so like a celebrity is no longer just their films and their one makeup. It's films, their own makeup line, their own perfume line, their own bikini line, their own mocktail line, their own, et cetera. So now it's like, we have this weird split where on the one hand, we want them to be realer than ever. But on the other hand, they need to be protected more than ever because they are the face of so many different streams of income for so many different people. And I think, as Ashley said, the interesting thing in addition to the fact that so many people, I call it like blind item culture, this idea that if you hear something anonymously, it's more authentic than if you hear it straight from the horse's mouth. Like if Blake Lively gets up there and goes, I'm going through a divorce, you're like, that's not true. That's PR. Meanwhile, if some fucking blog goes, I heard they're getting divorced, you're like, well, it has to be true. I heard it from no one. Like I heard it from like an unnamed source, and that's the most. And on the other hand, I think you still have like boomers, young people who are less online, who are falling for the PR more than ever, who are getting like the most sanitized version of these people. So it's like within every celebrity, there's the Us Weekly people version that's being like, come meet our new baby. And then there's the blind item version that's like, that baby's not theirs. They stole it from a gutter. They've been on crack this whole time. And it's crazy because I'm like, surely both sides can't, like there is a middle ground where maybe they tried crack once, but then they had that baby.
No, I totally agree. Like, it's so wild, kind of what you said about like Easter eggs and like how we perceive celebrity PR. Like, everything is a PR strategy now. It's so wild.
I think we give these celebrities a lot more credit than they deserve, to be honest. Sometimes they're just horny, hot people out on the town.
And I think that like sometimes the fandoms, it is people's like allegiance to it is so insane. The fact that even when you're like bringing Swifties into the conversation, I'm like, be careful.
Yeah. Me and my truth, we sit in silence.
No, absolutely. So obviously, you know, kind of despite, I suppose, social media, the celebrity memoir seems to be going really strong. We've had a few kind of viral memoirs in recent years. Obviously, Jeanette McCurdy's memoir and Julia Fox's memoir are two that come to mind. In your view, what unique insights or experiences does a celebrity memoir offer compared to other forms of traditional media? Like, why has it remained relevant?
Well, I think there's like a couple things going on here. One, what I would say makes it unique and better is what makes them good. And that is something that's often foregone by the author is time and perspective. I think when you're in the middle of these storms, and I think something these good memoirs really put forth is how quickly your life can change overnight, how often things are happening to you. I mean, to use Demi Moore, just because we read it yesterday as an example, you know, within 5 years, she went from being a completely broke teenager to one of the most famous women on earth, making millions of dollars, married twice with a baby, to Bruce Willis, who already wanted out. You know what I mean? And for that to all happen to somebody in like 36 months is a lot. And I think when you're inside of it and you're trying to handle all of the, like when you're in the middle of that kind of storm, it could be 10 people who hate you. It could be the entire globe who's mad because your movie sucks. It's hard to get perspective until you come out of it. So I think the best memoirs do have time. And I think that's something that like a YouTube apology or an Instagram caption can't really, you can't do it contemporaneously.
Yeah. And I also think it's just the gravity of the medium. I think that if someone is to put out a Instagram note clarifying something that happened in the media, there's something about that just feels very disingenuous nowadays. Like if someone just does like an Instagram text post story, you're just like, okay. But when you like fully put your story into a book, like a book, this printed form of media has more like gravitas. And I think that people are a lot more likely to take what you're saying seriously, unless it's one of those books that is just like pictures and garbage. Like there are a lot of those that come out too. But I think that when a celebrity really sits down and is like, okay, I'm going to write my entire story into 300 pages, people take it a lot more seriously than if they were to do like a long form interview where they sit down and say like, okay, I want you to really know my story.
Yeah. And I guess part of it too, like if I considered why I would read a celebrity memoir, it's because I'm interested in how someone got to where they were. And that's often missed. I mean, unless they're like a Nepo baby or something, but you know what I mean? Like if there's an element of mystery to their story, I want to know, like, how did they get to where they are?
Yeah. And they'll tell you sometimes in way too much detail.
But sometimes in no detail at all. Sometimes they're like, I moved to LA and I wanted nothing more. Anyway, the next week I was sitting down with my agent and you're like, well, how'd you get an agent? That's like a really difficult thing to get. Sometimes like the details they leave out are so funny. I mean, Busy Phillips, as Ashley talked about, she has a memoir. And I remember reading hers and she's just like so upset because at 23, she'd only done like one movie. And she's like, when will I get a second movie? And I'm like, okay, well, maybe next week. It seems like things are running pretty fast.
Maybe when you're done filming this season of Dawson's Creek, the biggest TV show out there, you know?
Yeah, totally. So speaking of social media and like fan parasocial relationships, I know you've covered some memoirs of celebrities who were deeply engaged with online culture and like obsessed with, I don't know, social media and Twitter, for example. I'm wondering if you think having an obsession with social media impacts personal storytelling and the nature of the celebrity more broadly.
I think something interesting I've seen is people who come up through social media or reality TV because their fame vessel has been oversharing. There's a lot of skipping that goes on. There's a lot of things where they assume you already know. Like a lot of reality TV stars will refer to a specific scene on TV and be like, here's what actually happened there. And if you don't know that television show, you're kind of like, well, what happened? Like you're like, why is this even important? So I think a lot of like social media and reality stars have like kind of an interesting job with these because often they're very rarely reflective. They're always people in the prime of their fame, which is the worst kind of celebrity memoir because it means they're just capitalizing. It's more, we call it like merchandise more than anything. And it's not reflective. It's not finding the general patterns and narratives. It's not sifted. But I also think they're doing this weird thing where, in theory, what we like about them and what they've gotten famous for is being transparent and honest, right? Like an influencer is somebody that you're like, I watched you the whole time. You should, in theory, know what's been going on. So then to get this, like, what was really happening book is kind of preposterous. We just read somebody, Tori Spelling, who we're obsessed with, who literally opened her fourth memoir being like, now that my reality show is canceled, I can tell you what was really happening. And you were like, well, then why are we calling it a reality show? Like, it's funny to be like, and then when are you going to write the book being like, well, here's what was really happening behind the book, behind the show, behind the podcast. How many layers of authenticity can you have before people just call you a fraud? And I think the Smiths, Will and Jada Pinkett, had that problem of how many times can you go back and be like, well, actually, here's the real truth. And then be like, okay, the truth behind the truth. And then you're suddenly, at some point you just go, I guess you'll never tell the truth.
Yeah, I also think that there is a certain type of celebrity, and it is the type of celebrity who is, one, more likely to write a memoir, and two, more likely to overshare online and therefore become a celebrity via oversharing channels, who is obsessed with public perception of them more than they're obsessed. Like, these are the people who are celebrities, not artists, kind of. Like, they're obsessed with the perception of them. They're obsessed with like media and storytelling over being a musician, being an actor, being whatever. And so I feel like their books are so responsive to the media and not just telling a life story. Like, they're putting a book out there specifically to respond to a number of stories about them and like a certain perception of them, not because they're like, oh, I'm an interesting person who's led an interesting life, let me tell you the story. And that is like, it's not every celebrity memoir, but it's the majority.
Yeah. And I guess on that note, do you see cancel culture shaping the way that celebrities tell their story, whether it's on social media or in the memoirs that you read? I guess comparing some earlier memoirs pre, quote unquote, TikTok cancel culture or not. How do you see a difference in how they report on those kinds of scandals that they've had?
There are a couple different ways that they do it, and I think it can be really interesting. Some of them will brush past it entirely and then we'll finish a book and it's a celebrity we're not super familiar with, and people will then come to us later and be like, but did you know that like XYZ happened? And it's just like, what? No, I didn't. I can't believe that it was just completely left out. And that's kind of, I think, what they're relying on. They're trying to like rewrite their story without this.
Paris Hilton is a really good example of that. She's somebody who left out a lot of the things she's done.
And then, but Paris Hilton's another good example of someone who left in some of it, because then you can say like, well, it seems she knows she wasn't always acting great. It's hard to explain.
I will say that I think cancel culture is such a new thing that we're not really seeing it in books. I think historically, pre like this social media attempt to like be politically correct, the things people were getting quote unquote canceled for were like women existing. You know what I mean? Like a woman putting on 10 pounds and doing a movie. And so when they read about that in their book, they're almost always vindicated. I would say very rarely when women look back at why they were like dethroned as a popular figure in pop culture, was it because they like really did something fucked up and like deserved it. So I think it'll be a while before we really can get an overarching idea of how people handle like quote unquote like online cancellations, because I think that's a pretty relatively new thing. I mean, at the end of the day, like, yeah, Demi Moore took a photo pregnant and people wanted her dead. Mariah Carey had a nervous breakdown, as she is allowed to, and people wanted her dead. The amount of
Jessica Simpson wore pants and people were so mad at her.
Yeah, she dared to weigh 128 pounds and wear pants and people wanted her dead. Like, these are things when you look back, you go, oh, we really fucked up there. So I don't know that we've seen it. And then, of course, men,
the things that they should have
brag about
for are things that they're so excited they did. They're like, oh my God, isn't it crazy the way that I disrespected this woman? And like,
that sounds horrible. So I guess to that point then, are you seeing kind of that boundary between creator and celebrity or influencers and quote unquote celebrity in the media that you guys are consuming, like the memoirs, do you see that line as very distinctive, or do you find that when these personalities report on their stories, it's very similar?
I definitely think you can see, I think more famous people, not always, but they tend to not need the money as much and they tend to have a longer career. And so they have that thing I'm talking about where they're able to look back on more and be more insightful and more interesting, more genuine. I do think anybody who feels like a 15 minutes of fame type celebrity, if they're doing a memoir, it is because they are like, well, I can't do a nail polish line, so I'll do a book instead. And I feel like it's very much rushed. I always say, like, who came up with the idea? Was it the publishing house or was it the celebrity? If a celebrity wants to write a memoir because they go, I have something to say, that tends to be a much deeper, juicier, more interesting, complicated text than if someone came to you tomorrow and said, hey, do you want to write a memoir and get it out in 6 months? Like, how good could that be? And that's what a lot of these reality stars tend to have.
Yep, for sure. So looking ahead, what would be your predictions for the future of celebrity memoirs or like the broader celebrity landscape as digital and social media continue to evolve?
I think something we're going to start seeing more and more of that I've noticed is in order to be taken seriously as a true celebrity, to make the jump from social media to, you have to dial back on social. I think an interesting case study would be Emma Chamberlain,
Addison Rae,
and the D'Amelios. Addison Rae and Emma Chamberlain have really distanced themselves from like TikTok, social. They are like full-fledged celebs now, whereas the D'Amelios have stayed very true to their TikTok roots, and because of that, they feel like TikTokers. Whereas Addison Rae kind of feels like a cool it girl, and Emma Chamberlain is like a fashion, I don't want to say icon, but she is like a true fixture of high fashion right now. And I think we came up with a couple of comedians who have done very well for themselves. I think someone like Rachel Sennett, who came up a lot on Twitter and Instagram, has really distanced herself from those social medias to be seen as a movie star. I really think
Jenny Slate's another good example.
Yeah, I really think we're going to start seeing people dial it back online. Like once you use it to gain fame, you have to then create a distance so that you can be taken more seriously. And I think like someone like Jennifer Lawrence, who's never even had social media, or even the celebrities who clearly only use their Instagram as like brand pushing, there's no like pretense that this is some insightful, authentic thing. I think that's going to be like the height of success and like a bragging tool and a way to cultivate the image of stardom.
I think what we're going to see more is people pulling back, because I think we were in a real oversharing phase where you had to be like viewed as authentic in order to like find success. And now that people are realizing you can kind of never win at that game, especially in the current era of everyone thinking everything is PR, I think we're going to see people pull way back, and we'll be back in this kind of place where the only insight you get is when they eventually put out a book or something like that. I think that there is something to like the books people take more seriously are the books that we had questions, like we asked for that book. There are people where I'm like, well, I'm curious to know what's going on in your life and who you are and how you got here. Whereas there are other people, like even Addison Rae right now, I feel like she came up so online, but if she were to write a book, I would want to know about this transition. I would want to know about like what's happening with her now. Like what, I feel like I don't understand her hopes and dreams anymore, but I'm excited to hear about it. Whereas with Charli D'Amelio, I'm like, well, you're still just, doing the say so dance, and that's fine.
The renegade, hit the renegade.
Like I don't have questions in the same way that I do, just because I feel like you see them too much. You want to ask for it. And I feel like there are a lot of people now where like they're making us ask for it, which is interesting again.
Yeah, it's like the problem of overexposure for a lot of these social media stars now, especially with TikTok. Before I let you guys go, I'm curious to know if you have a favorite memoir that you've read.
I have to say, we just redid Memoirs, and I'm so happy we did. I thought that was phenomenal. I think the Jeanette McCurdy one is phenomenal. We loved Molly Shannon. Danny Trejo is really interesting. Viola Davis is great. Minka Kelly was like weirdly really good. You don't see it coming. So those are some good ones.
Yeah, amazing. I think I've listened to all of those episodes of yours. So where can people find you? And you guys are coming to Australia. I did mention that in the intro before you guys joined, but are there tickets still available? Tell us about your tour and where can we find you?
We are coming in September, I think September 20th through to September 29th to Adelaide, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth. We are so flippin' excited. You can find us, we're Celebrity Memoir Book Club, the purple one. It's cute. It's like on lined paper if you're looking for our picture anywhere. We're on Instagram, TikTok, anywhere you get your podcasts. And the link to tickets is in all of those places, in every single bio and every single show notes. And if you Google Celebrity Memoir Book Club Perth, it'll pop right up.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for joining me. This was such a great discussion.
Thank you so much for having us.
All right, you guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Thank you so much again to Claire and Ashley for joining me. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope you enjoyed their commentary. Like I said, it was like a fangirl moment. I was so excited to chat with them. So thank you guys so much. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. And I will talk to you guys on Mini Scroll on Monday. Bye.